Welcome to the Torrance Time Machine. Now, I'm Thomas Edison, and I'll be your guide on another journey into the past. For those of you that haven't joined us before, this is a series of shows that was produced to honor the 75th anniversary of the city of Torrance. Each segment or journey deals with a different aspect of our city's history. Today, for instance, we're going to explore the impact of the Pacific Electric Railway on the development of Torrance. You know, I think that from the beginning of time, man has constantly searched for faster and more efficient ways of getting from one place to another. And the Pacific Electric Railway was one of the most efficient systems that was ever devised. Yes, those big red cars went as far north as Mount Low, near Mount Wilson, and all the way south to Balboa. The line stretched from Santa Monica all the way east to Redlands. There were more than 1,000 miles of interconnecting tracks, and it was, in fact, the largest electric railway in the history of the world. Yes, those lines connected Torrance with the rest of Southern California. And I might say that the history of that line is forever connected with the history of Torrance. But to show you more clearly what I mean, we need to go back in time. Back to the year 1897, when Torrance wasn't yet even thought of. Well, I think it's about time we got started, so let's go on out to the time machine. It's parked right outside. The city of Torrance grew from the vision of a determined entrepreneur, Jared Sidney Torrance. Likewise, the electric railway was created by skilled and ambitious businessmen who saw the potential for growth here in Southern California. It was self-made millionaire Moses Sherman and his brother-in-law, Eli Clark, who began developing electric rails in Los Angeles. In those days, they were calling them interurbans. As the system expanded, it attracted the attention of railroad men Harriman and Huntington. They quickly took control of rail service in the area. The two men were rivals, of course, with Harriman running the Southern Pacific and Huntington the Pacific Electric. He reportedly paid $110,000 for a franchise valued at only $10,000, just to keep Huntington's operation in check. In 1897, Jared Torrance, the founder of our city, was living in Pasadena. The city of Torrance was an idea whose time had not yet come, but Mr. Torrance was pursuing numerous business ventures in Southern California. One of the enterprises he helped finance was an exclusive mountain resort and the railway that serviced it. The line led from Pasadena north to Echo Mountain. The resort was the idea of a professor named Lowe. He intended to cater to wealthy tourists, but the venture failed. When the resort went bankrupt, Mr. Torrance became the sole receiver. Turning Mount Lowe into a profitable venture was a great challenge and a joy to him. He began by cutting fares in half and doing away with the image of an exclusive resort.
The mountain air and scenery were a constant source of delight. The Echo Mountain House was an attractive hotel, and I had the satisfaction of bringing the railroad out of bankruptcy and insolvency. It sold soon after to the Southern Pacific at a large figure.
In the early 1900s, Torrance was involved with many companies in Southern California. He served on the board of directors of a company called Union Tool, a subsidiary of Union Oil. Union Tool sought to expand its LA operation, but land was growing expensive in LA and labor unrest was beginning to stir. In 1911, Torrance began planning the industrial city which would eventually bear his name. Mr. Torrance purchased the land from the Dominguez family for around $1.5 million. It encompassed 3,500 acres and would be the location of Union Tool's new plant as well as other industries. The city would appeal to factory workers as well as factory owners. The workers would have a clean, well-organized town with pleasant, affordable homes in which to raise their families. Factory owners would have an economical place to build their plants, along with happy and contented employees to work in them. At the same time these plans were coming together, Huntington sold his share of Pacific Electric Railway to Harriman. Torrance realized that if his city was to be successful, it needed rail service to move people, products, and raw materials. He began negotiating with Harriman to build a line to the new city. On December 26, 1911, the day after Christmas, Torrance struck a deal with Harriman's Pacific Electric. The company agreed to build a spur line to the city. It would shoot off from the main line that ran from Los Angeles to San Pedro. The cars would come into the city from LA via Torrance Boulevard, down Cabrillo to Sepulveda, then turn on Normandy where they'd catch the main line again. The Pacific Electric also agreed to move their construction and repair shops to the city by 1915. In return, the railway was given free of charge a 125-acre site on which to build the new shops. Several companies bought land and began building plants in the city, but the Pacific Electric Depot was one of the first finished. The depot was a center of information. It was where the telegraph office was located, and of course the mail came into town on the red cars. Newspapers could be purchased at Mr. Sykes' stand in front of the depot. By 1913, many businesses had set up shop in the area. One of them was Salm Manufacturing. They made products from abalone shells such as buttons, ashtrays, and knife handles. In the early days, the nearest bank was in Gardena. Mr. Dolly, a local businessman, would ride the red car there, borrow $1,000 in gold and silver, and return to Torrance where he'd cash Union Tools payroll checks. Later on, he would ride the trolley back, deposit the checks, and pay $1 interest for the loan. In 1913, the country experienced a recession which stalled the development of the new city. Pacific Electric had planned to spend $750,000 on shops and maintenance in the area, and those plans were delayed because of the slow economy. It wasn't until 1916 that those plans were begun, and Union Tool, which had closed during the First World War, was now starting to operate. Now, although the new city didn't grow as fast as some had hoped, the presence of the Pacific Electric was appealing to prospective new investors. In fact, Mr. Torrance took his prospects for tours of the area in his own private trolley. Yes, the red cars were absolutely necessary if his new city was going to prosper. But the line actually worked against the commercial and residential development because with the railroad there available, the people who worked there could commute from other areas, from LA and from neighboring cities. And in the early days, many of the people did just that. In the early days, most of them did commute from LA or the more developed neighboring cities. This was great for the Pacific Electric, not so great for a young, struggling city. Mr. Sykes, with his stand at the depot, could count on a fair amount of business from commuters. Other merchants were not so lucky. They had to rely on a relatively small group of residents for their livelihood. The red cars also made it easy for residents to shop in neighboring cities or in the more sophisticated stores of LA. Commuting was made that easy by the Pacific Electric. Automobiles were still a luxury, only for the rich, and roads were downright disgraceful. A trip from Torrance to LA by car was a bumpy ride that could take the better part of a day, a familiar complaint. The red cars, on the other hand, were safe, comfortable, and fast. You know, it took less time on the average to get from Los Angeles to Torrance than it does today on our modern buses. The closest they ever came to bumper traffic was when 5 of the trolleys were hitched together during rush hours. The Pacific Electric line was an efficient means of transportation, moving 100 million or more passengers a year throughout Southern California. There were a variety of cars for varied needs. Some were designed to travel 60 miles from LA. Others only moved locally. One early innovation was the California car. It seated 48 and had an open-air section for enjoying the California sunshine. It may, in fact, have been an early attempt to create a no smoking section. In 1916, the Bernie car was invented. It allowed one man to serve as both motorman and conductor. They were smaller, seating only 28 passengers, and were used on short local lines. All the cars were numbered in series of 100 according to their model and purpose. The fastest was the 1200 class, which hit top speeds of 60 miles an hour. They seated 65 people with standing room for 65 more. They traveled on the lines going to San Bernardino, Long Beach, and Santa Monica. The wealthy traveled by private cars. Huntington had a luxurious car, custom built, to travel 90 miles an hour. After 1911, Huntington was no longer involved with the Pacific Electric, but it was he who is credited with creating the red car trademark. The distinctive red color first appeared in 1899 when he bought a small LA line. He left the cars their original color, which was red, and before long, red cars became synonymous with the Pacific Electric. "Ride the big red cars" became a popular advertising slogan of the day. In the early days, the Pacific Electric generated their own power. Steam turbines at this vineyard plant produced electricity which was sent down the line to numerous substations that were scattered along the Pacific Electric routes. In 1915, the Pacific Electric Company shifted from producing their own electricity to buying it from hydroelectric plants. Machinery from the vineyard plant did not go to waste. 2 boilers, a smokestack, and some of the other equipment was moved to the Torrance shops in 1919. The 20s were prosperous times for the Pacific Electric and for Southern California. Hollywood films were famous worldwide. The Southland's population more than doubled between 1920 and 1930. The Pacific Electric spanned 1,164 miles. Of course, the Torrance shops benefited from this expansion. They became a major employer in Torrance with 530 employees and a monthly payroll of $77,000. The men of the Torrance shops worked diligently to ensure that the cars were safe and well kept. They worked equally hard to ensure that the now famous red cars did not lose their cherry shine. The Pacific Electric believed in taking care of its employees. They provided recreation facilities for Torrance workers and purchased homes in the area which they sold to their employees. At that same time, the Pacific Electric was reaching its peak in popularity. The automobile was coming into its own. The interurban lines were now forced to slow down to accommodate cars at intersections. A public entranced by the freedom and luxury which automobiles provided pushed for more and better highways and roads. Instead of building overpasses and underpasses, the state cut through Pacific Electric rights of way in the interest of economy. Naturally, this increased running time, as the trolleys now had to stop for traffic at the newly created intersections. Cars were commonplace in Torrance in the 20s.
Although Pacific Electric's peak service was reached around 1925, it was already in decline when the Depression hit in 1929. When one thinks of the big red cars, it's usually as passenger carriers, but freight was also transported. Oranges and lemons from the groves in the area were carried on the big red cars. Other goods were carried also from Los Angeles to the harbor down in San Pedro. But none of the freight activity made up for the decline in passenger travel.
With the Depression on and gas selling for around 11 cents a gallon, It became cheaper for people to travel by car. In 1931, the Motor Transit Company moved into the Pacific Electric building in LA. The bus company was not exactly a competitor. In fact, they were affiliated with the Pacific Electric. Railroad executives could see the end of the line and didn't want to lose out on the increase in bus usage. The Pacific Electric closed more and more lines as bus service increased. In 1939, the last red car to make the trip to Torrance pulled away from the depot. The Second World War brought an influx of defense workers. It also brought gas rationing, a shortage of tires, and new life for the Pacific Electric. Cars were brought back into service, and in 1945, the Pacific Electric carried a record 180 million passengers. After the war, more proposals were made for saving the red cars, but the answer was the same. People wanted automobiles, and that meant more roads. Mass transit seemed an unpleasant necessity that could be dispensed with in a healthy post-war economy. Buses were the perfect alternative since they could travel on the freeways and make use of the new roads under construction. The Torrance shops were closed and eventually purchased by Reynolds Aluminum. Many of the cars were scrapped. Some were sold to developing countries in South America. This car was given a new lease on life by the Wilson family. They poured a concrete slab, bolted the car down, and made a nice home for themselves right here in Torrance. It is being given to the city, which plans to preserve it for its historical significance. The shops, with their beautiful, sturdy brick construction, were leveled in 1984 to make way for a new industrial park. The depot deteriorated over the years, but in 1987, a developer realized the value of the location and the beauty of the original architecture. He began restoration of the building, which will be used commercially when it's completed.
Modes of transportation will come and go, of course. I'm sure that vehicles even more fascinating than my time machine will someday be possible. But nothing matches the charm and romance of the big red cars. They remind us of a simpler time, a time of prosperity and adventure and wonder. And sometimes, if you listen very closely, and it's very, very quiet, you can hear the distant rumble of the wheels on the track and the conductor calling, "All aboard!"